Comment, like, subscribe. The bell keeps you notified. It helps the show thrive. The languages spoken across the globe are very much like families. Most languages have a parent language they derive from, as well as sibling languages they relate to, which came from the same parent. The best example of this has to be with the Romance languages, which have Latin as their parent, and their siblings include the likes of Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese, to name a few. Like real-life siblings, language siblings share similarities with one another. It's why there are words that are similar across different languages, though of course they are not identical. While there are some similar words in say Spanish and Latin because they are both Romance languages, someone who speaks solely one language and solely another language are not going to understand one another. Something that isn't a Romance language, however, is the language I'm using right now, the one spoken more than any other language: English. English is a very unique language for a variety of reasons, from its origins to its spread across the globe. This makes it easy for us to see English as something of a lone wolf in the world of linguistics, but that isn't the case at all. English is far from an only child and has a wide extended family. But out of all these family members of the English language, which one is closest to my mother tongue? Well, first and foremost, English is, as I'm sure many of you are well aware, a Germanic language. This alone should give you a clear indication as to what language might possibly be the most similar to English, but hear me out. While Germanic, English has been influenced by a multitude of other languages and has gone on to influence many other languages too. This means that languages that are close to English might not necessarily be part of the Germanic language family. For example, the French language is seen as being somewhat similar to English. It definitely isn't the closest relative to English, but with the Norman invasion of 1066, it meant that a multitude of French words or words with origins in French have found their way into the English language, and perhaps most noticeably into languages spelling in the written form. If we were to go along with the family analogy, French wouldn't be a direct relative, but maybe say a step-parent who came into English's life at a young age and had a degree of influence over them. Conversely, English has a deep influences on other languages outside of the Germanic family too. One I'm always tickled by are the words in Japanese which borrow from English. Japanese has borrowed words from all kinds of languages, with English being perhaps the most prominent, such as the Japanese word for ice cream being aisukurimu, which sounds remarkably like the English word. I just find it fascinating that a language like Japanese, that is so far removed from English in a variety of ways, still has an influence on it. By no means am I saying Japanese is the closest language to English either, but there are similarities there. Maybe in human family terms, English is a cool family friend that a baby Japanese wanted to imitate somewhat. And for the record, these human analogies I'm going to be using for this video are entirely made up by me for silly reasons and not based on any actual research. But yeah, English is a Germanic language, so its closest relative will most likely be another Germanic language. The earliest Germanic language we have dubbed Proto-Germanic and is something of a constructed language. This to English would be like a great-great-great-grandparent or something. Eventually, however, the Germanic language split into three groups, those being North, West, and East Germanic. While all Germanic languages do have similarities, the ones in the same smaller groups would be more similar to one another, e.g. the North Germanic languages are all more similar to one another than the languages in the Western and Eastern Germanic branches. Things break down even more, however, as North Germanic breaks down once again into two smaller groups, those being West Scandinavian and East Scandinavian, all deriving from the Old Norse language. The West Scandinavian languages are Icelandic, Faroese, and Norwegian, and the East Scandinavian languages are Danish and Swedish. None of these are English, as I'm sure you noticed, yet they have had influence on the language and are somewhat close to them, with also being Germanic languages. If you look at various North Germanic words, you will see similarities to English words. The North Germanic language with the closest similarity to English, however, seems to be Norwegian. This is because Norwegian, like French, had influence over Britain and the English language due to Viking invasions that took place over the 8th to 11th century. In human family relationship terms, well, say if your grandparent had a sibling and then that sibling went on to have children and then grandchildren. Norwegian is that in comparison to English, the grandchildren of siblings. Whatever the correct term for that is, someone go let me know down below please. Something worth mentioning before we carry on is that while there is the East Germanic subfamily of languages within Germanic, there is a slight issue with all that. That being that all East Germanic languages languages are now extinct. This included the likes of Gothic, Vandalic, and Burgundian, to mention a few. None of these have much/any influence or relationship to English. See them as English's long dead distant relatives. They didn't leave much of an inheritance. So we have established that English is neither a North or East Germanic language, which means that it has to be a West Germanic one. However, like North Germanic, West Germanic splits into a variety of smaller families too, and in some cases they break down into even smaller families too. One way Western Germanic languages split is into the two subfamilies of High German and Low German. This High and Low relates to the highlands and lowlands in different parts of the nation of Germany. Nothing to do with the pitch at which you speak these languages or anything like that. High Germanic languages include the likes of Yiddish and the modern German language, which all of these families are named after. Of all the languages that are part of High German, modern German is without a doubt one of the closest to English. Looking at German words, you can see similarities to them and English terms. See German as maybe a grandparent, sibling's child compared to English, which I think is a cousin once removed. Happy to be wrong on that one though. English finds itself within the Low German part of this subfamily, but Low German breaks down even further into Low Franconian, Old Saxon, and Anglo-Frisian. Unsurprisingly, Anglo-Frisian contains the English language. However, I want to look at these three Low German sibling family groups. Old Saxon contains just the extinct language of Low Saxon, so we needn't worry too much about it. Old Low Franconian, however, contains Flemish and Dutch. These two languages are pretty close to English, with Dutch perhaps being even more so. Dutch is seen as one of the easiest languages for English natives to learn, and vice versa. Seriously, most Dutch people speak better English than me. Dutch and Flemish to a lesser extent could be seen as the cousins of English, with their parent branches of Anglo-Frisian and Old Low Franconian being siblings. It's also worth mentioning Afrikaans too, a language spoken in South Africa which developed from Dutch and was influenced by native languages found in South Africa. Afrikaans is like a cousin to English too, but one that moved away and picked up on their new home's words and languages. So let's finally delve into the Anglo-Frisian branch, shall we? The Anglo in its name of course relates to English, though what about the Frisian? Well, that relates to the second language in this group, Frisian. You may not have heard of this language before. It is relatively small, with less than 500,000 native speakers, and only spoken in small parts of the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. But linguistically, it is the actual sibling of English, and even looking at words in the language, you can see just how similar they are. It's fascinating that the most widely spoken language on the entire planet has a sibling that is so similar to itself, yet flies so greatly under the radar. It's a real Beyonce and Solange situation we have going on here. Many sources fittingly see Frisian as the language that is closest to English, but there is another which might be even closer. The issue with this one, however, is the fact that many argue that it's not a unique language, but rather is a dialect of English. That being Scots. Scots is unsurprisingly a language, and yes, I do see it as a language, spoken in Scotland. It derives from Old English, which gave us modern English too. Scots is incredibly similar to English. Most English natives will be able to read a sentence in Scots after a moment or two of deciphering. Its written form is somewhat akin to writing out phonetically a transcript of someone speaking English with a thick Scottish accent. Seriously, Scots is so close to English that if English and Frisian are siblings, then English and Scots are twins. It's just a shame that not everyone is in agreement with Scots being a language and instead see it as a dialect. But speaking of dialects, if we were to look into them too as more distinct things, then we could argue that the languages closest to English are the various dialect forms of English that have sprouted up across the globe, with things like American English, Australian English, Irish English, and even more local ones in England itself, like Scouse or West Country English. These could be seen as the children of English, but they aren't really seen as fully developed languages, so maybe see them as the still gestating in the womb children of English. Whether they will become fully independent languages, however, remains to be seen, and you know what, that analogy is getting really dark right now, so I'm gonna drop it there. So what is the closest language to English? Well, it's Scots. However, if you don't see Scots as a proper language, then maybe it's Frisian. But if you want something more popular, it's Dutch. And if you want something more popular than that, it's German, and so on and so on. Languages are so interconnected with one another and influenced by each other that even as mentioned, a language like Japanese, which is so linguistically and geographically far removed from English, can still have similarities with one another. While England might be on an island unto itself, the language of English is far from an island. Its siblings and cousins, parents and grandparents are distant and close, big and small, and some aren't even really related by blood. Yet it must be remembered that families really do come in all shapes and sizes, and it was this family that helped shape English into the language that it is today. Name Explained depends on viewers like yourself supporting the channel financially on Patreon, so a huge thank you to everyone who does. Donating just $1 a month helps the channel amazingly and gets you bonuses including ad-free videos, exclusive content, and the power to request ideas to be made into actual Name Explained videos. $2 a month gets you all that, plus your name here with all these awesome people. Visit patreon.com/nameexplain or click the link down below to find out how you too can support the channel. Thank you. Thanks for reaching the end of the video. Why not watch another and subscribe to keep up to date on all things Name Explain. You can find myself on Instagram where I'm NameExplainYT, and join the Facebook group Friends of Name Explain to talk with myself and other name nerds. All that will be linked down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and once again, thank you all so much.